Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to another episode of Substances Explained. Today we're covering what I've been wanting to talk about for the longest time now, and that's air duster. This is a product mainly used for dusting computers clean and whatnot, and other things you can't just use water to clean with, but you can actually get effects from it as an inhalant. And it's one of the most dangerous things you can do. And I have to admit it myself though, guys, when I was younger, I had partaken in getting blasted off of air duster. It was a time in my life where I wasn't as cautious and a lot more ignorant about things, where a friend got me to believe it was actually nitrous. But that will be for a future story. From personal experience though, I can say it's the real deal when it comes to abuse, and providing some type of experience. But first, let me explain what this series is if you're new to it. Basically, this is a place where we break down a substance, or substances, inspired from reports we've read. This video today is inspired by the report, It's Like Nitrous times Infinity by 7 off Earwood, which I highly recommend you check this out to get an idea of what huffing air duster can be like subjectively, not only of the actual effects, but also some of the culture around it as well. But here we're going to give some vital information and explain the basics of air duster, while diving deep into it in some way. We cover things like the pharmacology, the chemistry, the history, toxicity, the culture behind it, abuse rates, specific cases, side effects, and pretty much anything you can think about. Though I'll say with air duster, I do mainly want to focus on the actual health effects and dangers of it, but we'll also tie in the users and how it becomes abused, as that plays a huge part in it. It is interesting as a substance, but pretty sad to see where some may end up with it. But I'm sure you'll enjoy this, so without further ado, let's dive right into this. So let's start off with the history and how air dusters came onto the market, and how it became used as an inhalant. The first duster could be traced back to a patent from the year 1930. And air duster itself, when used right, is actually pretty useful. If you have a computer, you know this can be a real help getting all the cracks and crevices. A single can like this that can shoot out air hadn't been invented just yet prior. It would have had to come from an air pump or some other device. But part of the reason it took until 1930 is because of the contents of the device itself. Actually putting air into a can isn't practical. That is oxygen. You have to have specific extreme pressure and temperature requirements for it to be stored like that. So instead, hydrocarbon alkanes or fluorocarbons are used. Most commonly these days, it's fluorocarbons. And fluorocarbons will be the main focus for this video, as they most commonly are referred to when talking about air duster. Things like butane and propane can be present, but because those have widespread usage across various products, we'll save those for a future video. But you may be asking, what the hell are fluorocarbons? Is it just air then? Well, technically it isn't pure air, but these can be pressurized ideally in these cans to get that desired blow whilst being able to store it properly. A lot of people may not realize this though, and confuse air duster with something like nitrous or just pure air. And there have been a handful of different fluorocarbons used in air duster products, but the main substance I want to focus on for this video is 1,1-difluoroethane, as this tends to be the most common one. The next most common one is called 1,1,1,2-tetrafluoroethane, but this is used more as a refrigerant and for air conditioners. Though I will say with tetrafluoroethane, there is little research with human use and animal studies, but it may have lower toxicity. But more research is really needed to clarify this. But tetrafluoroethane is more expensive, and difluoroethane gets used most. But air duster products do technically contain these substances, and these substances themselves will play a role in the effects one will receive. Before we break down difluoroethane though, I want to explain how inhalant use alone can be influenced by oxygen deprivation. The thing is, when you consume an inhalant, you're displacing and removing the oxygen in your lungs and your body with whatever it is that's being inhaled. With air dusters, it's fluorocarbons, which fluorocarbons do this with ease because they're denser than oxygen. But this very act alone can cause some degree of effects to occur, namely you getting lightheaded, dizzy, maybe seeing some colors and whatnot. Things you might expect since you don't have enough oxygen at the moment. But fluorocarbons have shown to have some effects on the body itself, namely causing CNS depression, to where some of the effects are comparable to alcohol, but this hasn't been fully explored yet. I would suspect a strong degree of dissociative activity as well based on how the experience can unfold, which it is suspected GABA and NMDA receptors could be at play here. But let's talk about the experience itself a little, how people come to use this, and then all the nasty side effects the fluorocarbon difluoroethane has shown to cause throughout history. So an inhalant high is something that is often very short lasting, but strong and repeatable. For computer duster, you'll probably get a minute or two tops of desirable effects before things die off. Part of this may just be due to your body leveling out the oxygen deprivation, but even if you look at safer inhalants like N2O or xenon, you'll see that these are also very short acting. The half-life has been found in mice to be no longer than a few minutes at most, but those short couple minutes sure are compelling enough to keep some coming back. But let's talk a little bit about the culture of inhalant use and growing up. I feel like these days it isn't as common as it used to be, which some data somewhat supports this, but it is still common enough where millions of people are using them every year. And this doesn't include third world countries, where the use of inhalants is suspected to be higher. Now, I do technically have a story of a time I huffed something when I was like in the 3rd or 4th grade. This was the first time I tried to get high on anything in my life. I can say I was literally inspired by like the media at the time, wanting to be cool by showing off, and just having an interest to see what it was like to get high. And sniffing a bottle of Germ-X was the easiest way at the time. And these reasons I feel like stand true for why someone may consider trying to huff something. Also, there is the exposure factor of it. Obviously, if you know someone who's doing it, and that person's a friend of yours, there's a much higher chance of you at least trying it. But there has been a lot of research done concerning inhalant abuse over the decades now, as huffing has somewhat been of a known thing ever since the early 1900s. Even before that, if you want to point out specific cases, such as with scientist Humphrey Davy, who was using nitrous oxide as early as 1799. And even before that, you can find the inhalation of certain fumes, oils, incenses and whatnot within certain cultures and practices throughout history. The Oracle of Delphi is a common example by the Greeks, where vapors were inhaled to induce a state of altered consciousness to be able to talk to the gods. So the act of inhaling something to get some type of effect isn't anything new. It's just what it's evolved into. It started ritualistically, then scientists using it for laughing parties, then slowly it being found in your everyday common items to be abused by anyone. Gasoline and ether abuse can be tracked back to the early 1900s, where inhalant abuse would essentially evolve into what it is now. By the 50s and 60s, knowledge had spread that a ton of commercial products could be abused as an inhalant. And there's a lot of factors to consider how likely one is going to be exposed to doing an inhalant. But research does suggest that for the most part there are going to be some undesirable correlations when it comes to inhalant abuse, both as influencers and consequences. For example, if you abuse inhalants, the chances are higher you'll use another hard drug, and vice versa. If you use hard drugs, you're more likely to abuse inhalants. And I won't list everything here, but things like delinquency, economic status, family problems, and much more tend to act as correlated factors. Also, the fact that the usage rates seems to be higher the younger the age group is, I would suspect other factors like ignorance, peer pressure, ease of access, and more are also strong influencers. Which, to be honest, doing the research for air duster and the users, is one of the saddest researches I've done yet. Inhalant abuse has been around for a long time now, but often doesn't get considered too heavily. Which a reason for this is because the percentage of abusers isn't as high for say something like methamphetamine or heroin. So there just hasn't been a ton of research on it or any special treatments. And often users of it will get grouped in with other types of abusers. But I also say it's sad because of just how dangerous and life-threatening it can be. A lot may just try it one time and that's it. A lot of people can have that mentality when they do a substance. But really, inhaling something like air duster is something you can die from using only one time. And that's not an over-exaggeration. The state it can put you in can set you up for death real easily. There is no official dosage with this stuff either, why would there be? And it really comes down to what your body can handle, and whether the circumstances are right or not for damage to occur. And from what I can gather on average, abusers are lucky to last a year or two, if that. Some cases may be a bit longer, but the majority of abusers who can't stop doing it don't end up staying with us very long. A lot of people display strong signs of depression and escapism with inhalant abuse, where many of them grow not to care the consequences of it, and eventually it does cost them their lives. And the addictiveness of it is real. It's not just a convenience drug, as some people really do like it. There have been some cases with celebrities continuing to abuse it themselves after being exposed to it from a young age. Just last month, it was thought that musician Aaron Carter had been abusing air duster before he passed. There is also research suggesting there can be inhalant withdrawal symptoms, on a level comparable to that of cocaine. Even myself, I have to admit there's an appealing quality about the experience that will make you want to try it again, as it is one of the most powerful things I've had actually. It without a doubt fits the profile for addictiveness and abuse. But let's talk about the actual dangers and what will actually happen to your body when you consume air duster, and just how unsafe of a practice it is. So with inhalants, there's this thing called sudden sniffing death syndrome. And it's kind of like how it sounds. Death suddenly occurring after sniffing or huffing something. And there's many ways this can actually play out. One will be anoxia, simply due to a lack of oxygen in the body. Usually this happens when someone passes out while still dosing, as some reports have detailed finding users out cold with the duster still in their mouths. Respiratory depression is also another possible cause, since it does cause that CNS depression. This is much rarer though as the cause of death. Then something called vagal inhibition can occur, where your vagal nerve gets affected in your neck, leading to complications with the heart. But this is actually the main concern itself directly: cardiac arrhythmias and other cardiac issues. And most often, this is factored as the cause of death with inhalant deaths. Because of the displacement of oxygen and whatnot, this can cause some major imbalances concerning electrolytes and other cellular changes. It's thought that specifically, you're much more sensitive to adrenaline. So much so, it leads to a heart attack. But besides sudden sniffing death syndrome, there are a lot of risks with simply trying it. Some things you probably wouldn't even think about. One thing is the temperature of it. Like I said earlier, fluorocarbons can be used as refrigerants and in other cooling devices. And with air duster, since there's no intent for human consumption or exposure, the temperature isn't really a huge concern, as long as whatever you're spraying isn't freezing. But when you're actually using air duster practically, you aren't going to spray the same spot. In fact, most of the time, you won't hold the nozzle down for more than 5 to 10 seconds. But when it comes to abusing, that can be a totally different story, since keep in mind, we only have one throat to use. Which the person who exposed it to me at least did it with a towel over. But even with that, that may not help. But I'm sure you can imagine just how spraying air duster down your throat at a cold ass temperature could cause some damage. Temperatures can reach as low as negative 20 degrees Celsius. And it isn't just like your typical freezer burn. They turn out as hydrofluoric acid burns, which are much more toxic and harmful. And this itself can be another influencer of cardiac problems, as the burns can lead to significant electrolyte imbalance and enzyme inhibition, which can bring on cardiac arrhythmias. And burns can also be subject to other body parts depending on exposure. One case, a guy's hand got pretty wrecked because he passed out with it on his hand. But as you can imagine, this isn't going to be good for your airways either, and there is potential for organ damage. Some have even claimed to drink the liquid of it, which is that much more dangerous. But here's a risk factor that I found in a handful of cases I bet most of you would have never guessed unless you know what excessive amounts of fluoride does to the body. So a condition called skeletal fluorosis can develop with air duster abuse. This is a bone disease due to too much fluoride, which can happen through normal consumption or inhalation. It can cause the bones to become hard and stiff, which can result in a loss of mobility and natural bone remodeling, which can cause further imbalances and a lot of discomfort and pain. So literally abusing air duster can fuck up your bones, and it's no joke. Most notably, things like people's hands, hips, and spine can be impacted. Which to me, this is really wild, and yet another reason why you should never abuse this. Influence of seizures seems to also be a risk factor with it. My personal friend who did it actually seized out like 2 or 3 times on it. It may not be a causing factor of seizures, but if you have a history of them, it can bring one on. Another thing is, there's a handful of cases of using it when driving, and it should be no surprise they ended up in crashes. This is a substance that can really take you out of reality, albeit for a minute or two, but it can really inhibit you and put you on your ass with how strong it can be. Interestingly though, users in these cases have been able to bypass DUI charges with it, just because it's a legal cleaning product and can act as a loophole. But still, that doesn't save them from messing up their bodies and lives in the crash, or somebody else's. And a similar note should be taken if this is done standing up or up and about, as the CNS depression could cause one to come crashing down hard. And really so far, we've only covered the physical aspects of this. There hasn't been a lot of research concerning its impact on, say, memory, focus, or general cognition, but much of this can be expected as effects from oxygen deprivation, which, when you deprive your brain of oxygen for say around a minute, is when brain cells start dying and lasting damage can occur. Again, this is a direct physical response, but mental difficulties are subject to rise due to this. There are some more areas, but this is the gist of things when it comes to inhalant abuse, specifically that of air duster. It's a sad reality that kids will end up trying to get high off this, and how some end up getting hooked to it. Because with all the dangers and feelings you get from doing it, you really have to not care what happens to you, which makes things even more difficult for the families who have to experience their loved ones going through it. The scariest thing about air duster and inhalants though has to be the sun sniffing death syndrome. There's just really no way to tell when it's going to be your time with air duster, or when it's too much, or just when the conditions are right for you not to make it. The risk for permanent damage or death to occur is present every time air duster is used, which makes this easily one of the most deadliest substances you can take. But ignorance does persist, so we need to keep spreading knowledge of this and the consequences of it to better prevent it. The ease of access thing will always present a problem, especially when someone abuses regularly, and it's why it's such a nasty habit to pick up. But prevention will probably help society the most, seeing how much younger age groups take part, but also serious intervention and steps need to be taken when one is abusing inhalants. And action should be taken urgently with this, since literally every time they use it, it could be their last. The chances of dying from it just from single usage is just way too high. I mean, these substances have shown to have global warming potential, just to give you more of an idea. We aren't meant to consume these. But I think we'll end things there for today. This is really just the reality of it, and it is pretty grim. Like I said, you have to be a certain type of person to really make the decision to abuse air duster. And I can't stress this enough, this is one of the last things to humor, and really make sure to reach out with help if you know anybody who's abusing. Also make sure to reach out for help yourself if you do need it. Be sure to check out the Discord server, we have a mental health support chat, and many people from the community will be happy to talk to you. You can also reach out directly to me through my socials if you'd like. But let me know what you guys want to see next, and if you enjoyed this. We can take this series in a ton of directions, and I do just love making these, so do let me know. But it's been someone that's no one, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.